Hi, this is Greg Kesich at the Portland Press Herald, and I'm here with Assistant Editorial Page Editor Sarah Collins.
Good afternoon.
And our podcast producer, Molly Adams.
Hi.
And Molly's been tracking a lot of the comments people have had about our election opinion content, and I just thought it might be a good time to kind of push through some of those questions.
I'm here to represent the people.
Yes, we have great respect for the will of the people, the voice of the people.
Yes, but I had some questions too. So the first thing was just like the opinion page of the paper, which now that we're mostly online, people don't really always see all these parts on the opinion page, and sometimes there's confusion as to whether something is a report or whether it's an editorial. So first, I gathered that there's kind of like 4 different things you would see in the opinion section. You would see letters to the editor, which people write.
Hugely popular.
Hugely popular. Write, mail in, mostly email nowadays. Then there are like the regular columnists who I read, which is you, Greg, and Bill Nemitz, Cynthia Dill, Jim Fossil.
Yes.
Our newest columnist, Victoria Hugo Vidal.
Yes.
The humble farmer.
Yeah, Victoria's not the humble farmer.
Yeah,
I don't want to get
yeah.
the people confused.
We also publish like national columnists.
Yes, syndicated.
Leonard Pitts, Charles Krauthammer. And then we have like guest columnists too, right? That's like published under Main Voices or a commentary.
Right, reader submitted.
You know, they're kind of like a letter plus, right?
Right. The best main voices are from somebody who has a connection to a topic that, you know, gives them a more in-depth look at it. And, you know, they have more to say than can be accommodated in a 300-word letter.
So that happen like someone writes a letter and you're like, oh, they actually have more to say than this?
Yes.
Okay. Can someone submit a column too?
Yes, to Main Voices.
Okay.
It often works the other way too. Sometimes somebody will submit a column and will say, this looks more like a letter.
Okay. So then the fourth thing, which I think is the most controversial thing on the opinion page, is our view, the staff editorials. So let's just get into a really basic question, which was asked by both Scott Scharf on Facebook and by a commenter who used the name me, but they're not me, on the website. Me said, why is a newspaper taking sides in any election, and what makes it a good idea? And Scott said, how can the Press Herald remain impartial yet be so open with their endorsements? So I guess the question, if I boil this down, is how are editorials written, who contributes, and then we'll talk about endorsements because I've learned it's a separate thing. So how about just a regular editorial from the paper?
You know, the regular editorial is the institutional voice of the newspaper, written by members of the editorial board on behalf of the whole board. And the board consists of Sarah and myself, Ben Bragdon, who's the editorial page editor in Central Maine, our publisher, Lisa DeSisto, executive editor, basically all the names you see on the masthead. And generally, on a day-to-day basis, the editorials are written by Sarah, Ben, or me. And we have some conversations with other board members. But on a day-to-day basis, it's pretty much us doing the editorials. And you know, whether or not it's what did he say? Is it a good idea? It's, you know, it's hard to say. I mean, the bad reason that we do it is that it's always been done, right? I mean, it goes back to the 19th century when there was lots and lots of newspapers, and they were all...
And each one had a unapologetic, blatant bias.
Yeah. And then later, when, you know, the technology changed and newspapers were reaching bigger audiences, they made an effort to segregate the opinion out of the news pages and put them in a special section of the paper. And that's kind of like our little playground, is where people get to say what they think. And this has also kind of changed over time, but I've always looked at it as an invitation to have a conversation. You know, this is what we think and why. and it's up to readers to decide if they agree with how we got there, or if they disagree with how we got there, but they still might agree with the end result. It's a kind of thing. It invites more contribution.
And I wanted to add to the list of features on the editorial page. We have a guest editorial called Another View, and if somebody presents a particularly cogent response to our view, we'll give them their say. It's 300 words or less.
But that's a rebuttal.
That's a rebuttal.
Yeah.
So there's a different process when you're doing an endorsement, and maybe that answers Scott's question a bit when you explain that. How can the Press Herald remain impartial yet be open with endorsements?
It's not all really that different. It's more it's just more formal with endorsements. I mean, with endorsements, we have both sides in on everything that we endorse on, and
when you say both sides, it's like the organizations.
Either a candidate,
yeah,
if it's candidate, or if it's like a three-way race, we'll have all three candidates in, and we like to do it to have them both in at the same time, so it's a little bit of a debate, but much less formal, and the board votes.
Except for our managing editor, Steve Greenlee, and our executive editor, Cliff Schechtman, who feel that there needs to be a bright line between news and editorial, and they don't want any question that the editorial side is influencing the news coverage.
And they, interestingly, were very much against us doing endorsements at all. One year we didn't, in part because our ownership structure was very, our owner was Donald Sussman. He was very tied in politically with the Democratic Party, and his wife, who was the congresswoman. And they felt we needed to completely stay out of the political process, and they still feel that way. And they don't vote. They sometimes attend the meetings, but they won't vote on endorsements. And we changed ownership, and then the vote went the other way, and now we're doing endorsements again. But again, I would say I don't really feel like we're taking sides. I feel that what we're doing is maybe in a more formal way, doing what every voter has to do, which is take in the information and come to a conclusion. And to me, the reasons why you support something is more important than the final decision, right? So,
right. We are an institution, and we're seen as, whether people like that or not, the establishment. And there are so many sources of information that people are looking to somebody who sorts this information out for a living, has gone through the data and has looked at the history and says this is a good idea or this is not a good idea, and whether you agree with them or not, it at least gives you a jumping off point.
So we at least have talked to both sides, and
yes.
Most voters aren't in that position.
All right, so these are going to be more comments than questions, because a lot of commenters didn't really phrase things as questions, but I think maybe you guys might want to address some of these comments that are representative of a lot of opinions out there. And I'm sorry I'm being so negative. There's a lot of positivity out there too.
Oh yeah.
So,
a lot of love.
It's always more fun.
Editorial page love.
So this is from Bud Van Lagerman, great name. And this was after you released, you're done with all of your editorials for the season, both endorsing candidates and issues. And Bud's takeaway was the Press Herald has taken the most conservative position about every single possible candidate or question on the ballot. Why do they even bother making endorsements? Has that been the reaction that you've seen?
No. And I would love to know where Bud Van Lagerman's street address, because I'm positive he lives on the Portland Peninsula, as do Greg and I, by the way, because only on the Portland Peninsula could we be considered conservative. I grew up an hour away from Portland, and I can tell you that we are considered socialist.
Right. Not even. I mean, you can stay in Portland. You just have to get under 295. And no, it's there's an old Henny Youngman joke. How's your wife? The answer, compared to what? We may have picked some positions that were not the most. I don't know what you call them. Liberal is apparently the new conservative here. Any candidate that we endorsed would have been the most liberal candidate in any race in any other election in Maine, right? I mean,
yes.
The only one I would say that we maybe took an actual conservative position, and it's one that we would have agreed with, the Maine Heritage Policy Center. I mean, at least come to the same conclusion, which is the rent stabilization question, local question 1. But we didn't get there through conservative reasoning.
No, we did not. Not the property rights
Or
free market.
We were concerned about this 7-member board signing off on thousands and thousands of rent increases every year, and the way that stabilizing the rents right now doesn't do anything to anybody doesn't help anybody who already can't afford it. But we didn't say we were against rent stabilization in any form, or we're only conservative or even really middle of the road in a very narrow context.
Amy B. in Portland made a comment on your endorsement of Jill Dewson for the Counselor at Large seat. Amy said, "This is the same editorial board that recommended we vote for Ethan Strimling for mayor of the city." Now, just a few months ago, Greg, you said that was something you regretted endorsing.
We were disappointed. I was disappointed with Mayor Strimling, and yes, it's true. We did endorse him.
Well, I guess my question is
Hey,
really...
we're not right. We didn't say we're always right.
Are you always right or what?
Yeah.
No, well, you said you had some transparency when the board endorsed the bond to fund the rebuilding of 2 elementary schools as opposed to 4 elementary schools. Right up top, you said, we've changed our position on this.
I mean, we spent an hour talking about this, and was it over? Did that one go over an hour?
Yeah. We mean the actual meeting with the advocates. That was an hour and a half. But
some of the information we're hearing, we've heard, has been presented to us before, but we're hearing other information that reframes it. And I'd rather be known for being able to take in new data and assimilate it than to have a wall up between me and anything that might have an impact on my paradigm.
That's editorial writer lingo there.
Right. I almost used impact as a verb, which, by the way, is my pet peeve, but
Sarah does not approve.
No, I don't.
This is Mainer 2020. Portland Press Herald is a corporation, too tied in with other corporate profits, so whomever they endorse is most likely a money-grubbing sellout.
I suppose that's so. I mean, we're not, most newspapers in the country right now are owned by big media companies, and that's not us. We have an owner, Reed Brower, who owns a handful of weeklies in the Mid-Coast. He owns the Press Herald and our sister papers in Augusta and Waterville, and he's recently bought the Lewiston Sun Journal.
Although we don't share operations with the Lewiston Sun, as we do with our Central Maine papers.
But, so to the extent that we're a for-profit business, yes, we are a for-profit business. And are we tied in with other businesses? Sure. We run on advertising, and advertising tends to be retail sales, car sales. So we're connected to the community through our business. Does that make us corporate sellouts? I guess everybody's entitled to their opinion, right? I might be grubbing, but I haven't been getting any money. I'll tell you that right off the bat.
If we're selling out, we're not doing a really good job of it.
We sold out cheap.
So here's a little preview, because coming up next, Bill Nemitz is going to join you to talk about his weekend column about Bree LaCase's mailer. And LV in the comments section, which was lit up, said the Press Herald wanted Congress Square Park sold. And this is their way of getting back at one of the key players who prevented that from happening. She's saying that the Press Herald did not endorse Brie LaCase because we wanted to see Congress Square Park sold. Brie LaCase spearheaded the campaign that kept it in place and honestly, as a downtown dweller myself, really revived it. That space activated it. Is that true or not? Did the Press Herald want to see Congress Square Park sold?
We did indeed.
Well, we endorsed endorsed them selling part of the park. You know, we lost, but frankly, I didn't even recognize Brie LaCase's name until you know, she told us that she was involved in that
Yeah,
effort.
I recognized her last name. I think her father was active in the Congress Square Park effort before she was, but I didn't, like Greg, I didn't connect her with it.
It's not like curses. They took away my vision of Congress Square. You know, I just thought, I listened to both sides. I thought the other guys made a better case, but you know, that's life.
Yeah, I guess what I sort of also take away from my time working with you two as well is that in a way it's like it's just an opinion, man.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, you know, it's crazy where we have to have opinions on everything.
Yeah, we do, and people will ask me, you know, outside of the Press Herald, who know I work here, will ask me, you know, what do you think of X issue, that it's very portentous. You know, how is the newspaper approaching this? And first of all, I'm not in the news on the news side, and second of all, you know, we're not like the Queen Elizabeth II. I think we turn around more quickly than that.
Okay. Anything else that I should ask or that you guys feel like you didn't hit on?
Oh, I wanted to let people know that letter writers, columnists, do not write the headlines on their letters and columns. We often get responses that use that as a jumping off point. You know, how dare so-and-so say this? Well, actually they didn't. You'll want to talk with a copy editor who's here between, 4 and midnight.
And maybe you don't really want to talk to them.
Exactly.
They're kind of grumpy. So I'm back with Bill Nemitz. And Bill, you did something this weekend I don't think I've ever seen, which is a column about a mailer about an endorsement.
I guess we've made history.
Yeah. This is really something, you know.
2 days before the election.
Yes, by the time anybody hears this, they'll know how the election worked out. But talk me through this, because how did you pick this out as something you wanted to write about?
Well, it goes back to our editorial board meeting on October 23rd, where we invited in the 3 candidates for the at-large seat, Jill Dewson, Joey Burnell, and Brie LaCase. And it was a spirited discussion. And I honestly went in there not really knowing who was going to get my vote. But a couple of things very quickly became apparent to me during that meeting. Number one, that Jill Dewson has a long and pretty impressive record. What struck me about the 2 challengers, and in particular Brie LaCase, was this kind of repeated complaint that that she and others are not being listened to by the city. So Jill responded to that with, I thought, was a pretty good iteration of all the various steps and that these very Congress Square Park, other things like that go through, and how many opportunities there are along the way for public input. So to say that you're not being heard or don't have an opportunity to be heard was really belied by the record. So anyway, we come out of this long meeting, and I think the consensus pretty quickly.
It was unanimous. Yeah.
Unanimously fell in behind Jill Dewson. So we endorsed her.
Yeah.
End of story.
Usually.
So last week, this flyer comes out and starts hitting doorsteps throughout Portland. What struck me about it and what struck others about it was the repeated use of the Portland Press Herald logo on the mailer. Whenever, as you know, because you write these things, whenever we do these endorsements, you always, how do I put this diplomatically?
Consolation prize.
You throw a bone,
Yeah.
to the other candidate.
Not 100% of the time, but we try to recognize that this is like a volunteer work,
Right.
that people are putting a lot of
Yeah.
effort into
So you
running.
acknowledge
And,
the effort, right? So we did that with Bree. I counted, there were 20 paragraphs in the editorial, and the one about her was, of course, one.
Yeah.
And on this flyer at the very top was that paragraph, along with attributed to the editorial board of the Portland Press Herald. And then she proceeded under that to list 9 more quotes, all from letters to the editor that we have published in support of her candidacy. And each of those had, to the left, in pretty small type, the name of the person who wrote that, and then next to that, again in the big type, same as with the editorial snippet, was the Press Herald. So the end result is that you have 5 on each side, 10 Press Herald logos slapped all over this flyer. And you are given, I would continue to contend, upon first impression when you look at this thing, which is very often the only impression most people get, that the Press Herald endorsed Bree LaCase. And so that I was taken aback by that. Yeah. I thought that our name, our brand, if you will, was being co-opted, and I as a member of the editorial board, and just as significantly as somebody that has worked for this newspaper and its predecessor owners for 40 years this December, that brand, that name, that editorial voice is something I take very seriously. So I did not think it was appropriate at all to co-opt it in that way. I called Bree LaCase on Friday afternoon, and we went back and forth on it for a little while. It was pretty apparent that we were not going to agree on this. I also spoke with Joey Brunel and Jill Doosan, who came away with the exact same impression I and others did. So I went ahead and wrote the column, and here we are.
So here's something interesting to me, is that I had much the same reaction you did. It wasn't a column writing day for me, and the only way I would have been able to respond was by writing an editorial, which I started to do. And it felt something out of scale about the unsigned institutional editorial 2 days before the election, or the Saturday before the election, felt unfair. Mm-hmm. After we talked and you said you would consider doing it as a column, to me that felt different, and it kind of speaks to, we had a discussion earlier about what's a column and what's an editorial, right. and I'm not even sure I really can tell you why I felt it's so different. But do you have
Yeah, I
sense?
did. We were batting around how to deal with it. I read the editorial that you wrote, and I thought it was great, and then that was being kind of circulated. And there were various reactions to that. But one reaction that did emerge was that, is this, hitting a thumbtack with a sledgehammer here? So kind of just light bulb moment hit me was, well, the column would address both. The column would give her opponents an opportunity to respond to this, and at the same time give the newspaper, or me as a member of the newspaper's editorial board, a chance to also address it, as institutionally, without that, editorial page voice that caused some concern. So I'm very comfortable with how it turned out. I know that there are a lot of people in camp the case who are
well, and what's great about the column is that it went beyond what one candidate did. It was really about some of the forces that are active in Portland politics right now that we have touched on in a number of different ways, but hadn't really brought them all together. It's Bree LaCase, Stephen Beal, who is the founder of Progressive Portland, the for school bond campaign organization, which is run by his wife, Emily Figdor. Emily Figdor, until recently, was the chairman of the Portland City Committee, and they're all tied together with Mayor Ethan Strimling, who has had a desperate search for allies on the city council, and is trying to achieve through this election what he wasn't able to get through negotiation with his colleagues. Right. And to get that all together in one place, I think was
well, I didn't
important.
bring the schools into it.
Okay.
That was more a question of space. I mean, how you can only digress so much. But one thing about those various players that you cite that has struck me as perhaps the most disingenuous part of this political phenomenon that's taking place in Portland is how they repeatedly insist that they are all acting independent of one another. Portland, progressive Portland doesn't work with the mayor. The four schools, even though Emily Figdor and Stephen Beal are husband and wife, they don't collaborate on their two things. One of the things, as I noted in the column, was Bree LaCase was vague at best when it came to when we asked her to articulate her connection with progressive Portland and those folks. And
she denied them 3 times.
Well, it was almost, you wondered if she had backpedaled so far away from them that all of us came away feeling like, no, we really don't believe that. So I think that's what raises a lot of people's eyebrows, is that they clearly work in coordination with one another. It came out, for example, that Stephen Beal provided an email list to LaCase's campaign that came, at least in part, from Progressive Portland's email list after they had said they weren't going to get involved in any, council races. So there's all this kind of behind-the-scenes collaboration. But then when confronted with it and asked, are you all collectively, in fact, this new political force in Portland, they all act like they've never met one another.
Right. And they're insulted that you would even suggest they are.
Yeah.
We used to have a very active Green Party. I mean, we still do, but they would recruit candidates. They would run under the Green label. They endorsed a platform. They would, have issues that they would promote in referendum campaigns, and you never had any question about who was a Green and what their issues were and how they were related to each other. Right. And then we have this where it's all kind of mysterious,
very shadowy, and that's the complaint I have with Progressive Portland, for one, is this the lack of transparency. I mean, this group's been around for a year, roughly, and I still don't know exactly what their governance structure is, who is on this so-called steering committee. The only time you ever hear about the steering committee is when someone leaves. And then, what's their membership? Does membership in Progressive Portland mean that if I'm on Facebook some evening and I see one of their posts and I hit like, that I'm a member? Mm-hmm. Because I've never heard of have you ever heard of a Progressive Portland meeting where they actually get together in one for their own meeting?
Right, they show up for city council stuff,
right,
and they can mobilize.
But I just don't get the feeling, in its year of operation, I've seen Progressive Portland do a lot of things that are very disruptive, but I haven't seen them out there as a bona fide group of people. So, and for a group that spends a lot of time complaining about transparency in government and things like that, my conclusion after 10 months or so is that, this is a kind of a pot, meat, kettle situation. Where's their money coming from? That's another question. I mean, why won't they reveal that? They gave, what was it, $20,000?
To the school
referendum.
Yeah.
Where'd that money come from?
Yeah.
Other than the fact that it came from Progressive Portland. So, a lot of questions.
So, this is not the first time that people have used the logo of the Portland Press Herald for a political reason, and most recently, I think Mary Mayhew, in her rollout of her campaign for governor, had fake front pages that would show the great news that was going to happen after she became governor. Do you see this along the lines of?
Yeah,
lines of that?
and in retrospect, I think the Mayhew thing was so over the top that any rational person looking at that knew that this was, that this was concocted. This was the material that was under that was so bizarre that there would be very, very few people, if anyone, would look at that and come away confused. Clearly, she just ripped off the logo.
Cut it to the Daily Bugle or
Right.
something. Yeah.
I think this one was a lot more subtle in that it was clearly, in my opinion, trying to suggest that the Portland Press Herald, with an out-of-context quote from the Portland Press Herald, had endorsed this candidate when, in fact, we had not.
I thought another reading you could have of that mailer was that this is somebody who is so active around town that she's constantly appearing in the newspaper. Because the letters were written in very small print, but you see all these, and it looked like these were all taken out of the newspaper.
Right.
And technically, yes, they were taken out of the newspaper. But as we know,
What's the easiest way to get in the newspaper?
one things that campaigns do is they get their volunteers to write letters to the
Right,
editor.
right.
And so yes, she was endorsed by her volunteers,
Right.
by her supporters.
So it was neither news coverage nor editorial content.
Yeah.
It was the letters to the editor.
But the
column.
impression it gave is like, boy, everybody is talking about
Right.
This candidate.
Right.
I have been asked from our crack producing staff, is there any chance that she was just a victim of bad graphic design? Is this design malpractice?
They have insurance for that?
Yeah.
I asked her about that, and she said she did elaborate a little bit about the designer, who is a guy who works for VIA, the big ad agency here in Portland. And as it said in the quote that I used, he doesn't do political stuff. He doesn't. And I'm at this point, not having spoken to him, I'm a little reluctant to drag him into this. But I will say this: I did back check because and looked at his resume and looked at his background. So if it were somebody who was truly an amateur or somebody who had very little campaign literature design experience or any design experience, I would have said maybe. But in this case, I'm not convinced.
And back to the original question, before you came in, we were responding to a reader question about why we do this kind of opinion journalism at all. That why don't we just report the facts and let the readers come up with their own opinions? And of course, nothing that we do prohibits the readers from coming up with their own opinions, and we both have the scars to prove it. But isn't this interesting? This is a place where there was a real need for an opinion to be spoken out loud. And you had the opportunity to do it.
Well, and I don't take that opportunity lightly. But I've always seen our role. I think first and foremost, the role of any good newspaper is to report the news and to get the information out there. The next layer on that is to provoke, stimulate, whatever word you want to use, discussion, analysis, debate, which I think are all hallmarks of a vibrant democratic society. So I think that's where we come in, and that is to consider what's out there, and to apply our best thinking and reasoning and communication skills to that, not with a goal toward reaching this nirvana where everybody in the world is going to agree with you, but rather to use it as a kind of a starting off point for further discussion and debate. So it has never been my intention to reach a point where readers agree all the time. I was out to dinner the other night, and as we were leaving, this nice young woman in the restaurant grabbed me by the sleeve and introduced herself and said, "I just wanted to tell you that I agree with you 99.9% of the time."
Yeah.
And my wife is accusing me of obsessing because all the way back to the car, I kept saying, "What is that 1.1%? What did I say?" That but that's the point.
Yeah.
You don't want people to say, I agree 100% of the time, because frankly, if that happened, I would wonder just how much independent thought these people are applying to the world around them.
The one I always get is people say, I don't agree with you all the time. And I said, that's fine. I don't agree with me all the time either. Yeah.
That's right.
I changed my mind a lot. Okay, well, thanks a lot.
Sure.
That was a great column and very timely. And thanks.
This is a Press Herald podcast. You can hear past episodes at pressherald.com/podcasts. You can subscribe on iTunes, on Android devices, and stream on Stitcher. Please email comments and questions to letterstotheeditor@pressherald.com. Thank you for listening.